You might think that being a maid in a grand mansion is just a job. That you come, you clean, you cook, and you leave. But I've learned it is never just a job when every glance, every word, and every action reminds you that you are less. I grew up knowing that the people I served would never see me as family. Not the aunt who sneered at my existence, not the cousins who mocked me, and certainly not the man I called uncle, who treated me like I belonged to the shadows rather than the sunlit halls of this mansion. They couldn't know the little truths hidden beneath my quiet hands, beneath my bent back and tired eyes. They thought humility was weakness. They thought obedience was enough to make me invisible. But they were wrong. Every morning, I rise before the sun. The floorboards groan under my weight as I sweep corridors that glimmer with wealth I could never touch. I polish silver chandeliers until my arms ache. I scrub marble floors with my palms raw and my knees sore. All while hearing the laughter of those who consider themselves superior. There's my aunt, Lady Marguerite, with her perfectly manicured hands and her disdainful smile. She enjoys pointing out my mistakes: the slightly uneven fold in a curtain, a dropped crumb on the polished dining table, or the faintest smudge on a silver platter. And she never misses a chance to remind me, "You are not one of us, darling. Never will be." And then there are my cousins Isabella and Charles. Children of privilege, raised on the belief that cruelty is a form of sport. Isabella delights in whispering that I belong in the kitchens rather than the drawing rooms, while Charles finds endless amusement in hiding my tools, spilling my soap, or placing me in humiliating situations before guests. I smile through it all, because to resist now would be foolish. Patience, I tell myself. Observe. Wait. The truth is, I've always known I was smarter than they believed. I've always understood more than they suspected. I learned early on to read not just words, but intentions. Not just gestures, but secrets. And while they indulged in their arrogance, I stored knowledge like treasure in my mind, piece by piece. As one might collect gold coins under the very eyes of the people who would never pay them. Still, it is hard. The loneliness seeps in at night when the mansion is quiet, when the walls seem to whisper reminders of my place. I dream sometimes of another life, one where I am not hidden, not mocked, not overlooked. And yet, in those dreams, there is always a shadow of doubt. What if I am nothing more than a maid, destined to serve, destined to be ignored forever? But life, as I have learned, is never as simple as it appears. And neither am I. One evening, as I carried the silver trays from the dining room, I noticed a small, folded letter wedged between the pages of an old family Bible. It was yellowed with age, the ink faded but legible. The words made my heart stumble. To the rightful heir, should they ever seek the truth. I froze. My pulse raced. Could this be real? A secret, a truth hidden in plain sight, lying beneath decades of false assumptions and cruel deception. I slipped the letter into my pocket, my hands trembling as I continued my chores. Acting as if nothing had happened, I watched my aunt move through the grand hall, laughing with guests, completely unaware of the storm brewing quietly in the heart of her insignificant maid. I realized then that the power in this house was not absolute, not eternal. And perhaps, if I chose, the scales could tip, but that was only a thought. A dangerous, forbidden thought. For now, I kept my place, swept the floors and smiled while my soul whispered of justice yet to come. The life of a maid may seem small, invisible, easy to dismiss. But shadows have a way of waiting, and patience I have in abundance. And one day, those who think themselves untouchable will see that even a shadow can strike. The days passed, each one blending into the next, but the letter I had found burned in my mind like a secret fire. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who had written it? Who had intended for me or someone like me to find it? And why had it been hidden so carefully, so deliberately, in plain sight? I moved through the mansion as always, a silent observer, pretending to fold curtains or polish silverware. But now every glance, every whispered conversation, every hurried footstep carried new meaning. I began to notice details I had once ignored. The way my aunt's eyes flicked toward me when she thought no one was looking. The hurried tone in my cousins' voices when my name came up. Even the staff, usually so tight-lipped, seemed to share knowing glances when I entered a room, and then there were the whispers. The ones I wasn't supposed to hear. It started with Mrs. Hargrove, the old housekeeper who had been here longer than anyone could remember. I was scrubbing the library floors when she muttered to herself, her voice low and trembling, "If only she knew." I froze mid-motion. My heart thumped, and I stared at her from behind a tall bookshelf. She glanced at me, eyes widening, before she turned away quickly. My instincts told me she had said more than she meant to. Perhaps she knew the truth. Perhaps she had always known. Later that day, I discovered a photograph tucked away in a drawer behind some old ledgers in the study. It was black and white, edges frayed. In it, a woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to me stood proudly beside a man who looked like my uncle. The resemblance was undeniable, and in the corner of the photograph, a small inscription read, "To my daughter, may you know the love you deserve, even if life keeps us apart." My breath caught in my throat. Daughter, could it be? Questions collided in my mind. Was I the child they never spoke of? Had I been hidden, deliberately removed from this world of wealth and luxury? And if so, why? I needed answers. I had to know, no matter the danger. That night, after the family had retired and the mansion lay in silence, I slipped into the study. I combed through old ledgers, letters and diaries that had been long forgotten. It was exhausting work, the kind that made my arms ache and my eyes sting, but I couldn't stop. Each piece of paper felt like a clue, each faded word a step closer to the truth. And then I found it, a small, leather-bound journal, tucked behind a stack of business documents. I opened it carefully, my fingers trembling. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, deliberate. It told a story I could hardly believe. A child had been born, a daughter, to the family line. Circumstances had forced the child to be hidden for her protection. Only a few trusted individuals knew the truth. I pressed the journal to my chest, my mind spinning. Every insult, every cruel word, every act of mockery I had endured in this house, it all took on a new meaning. They had treated me like a servant, a nobody. But they had been staring at the rightful heir all along. For the first time, a thought bloomed in my heart, dangerous and exhilarating. If the truth could be found, if the proof existed, then perhaps justice could be served. Perhaps I could take back everything that had been stolen from me, not with anger alone, but with cunning, with strategy, with patience. But I had to be careful. My aunt, my cousins, they would never surrender their control willingly. They would fight. They would lie. They would try to break me. And yet, I felt something stirring deep within me, a power I had never allowed myself to acknowledge. I was no longer just a maid. I was something far more dangerous. A daughter denied, a truth hidden. A storm gathering strength. As I returned to my quarters that night, the mansion silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. I whispered to myself, they think they know me. But they have no idea who I really am. And one day, they will. I remember the moment clearly, the one that changed everything. It was late at night. The mansion was quiet except for the creaking floorboards beneath my feet. I had been poring over the leather-bound journal I had found, reading each line carefully, tracing the story of a child hidden from a family too blinded by pride and greed to recognize her. The truth was intoxicating and terrifying, but then I found it. A drawer in the study, previously unnoticed, had a false bottom. My hands trembled as I lifted it, revealing a stack of documents, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved. At the top was a letter, sealed with crimson wax, bearing the unmistakable signature of my grandfather, long dead, long revered. I broke the seal. My eyes raced over the words, "To whom it may concern, my daughter, taken from the household under circumstances that none should question, is the rightful heir to all estates, lands, and fortunes belonging to this family. Should she come seeking her inheritance, she shall receive it without dispute." My fingers shook as I read again, making sure it was real. Legal documents followed: wills, estate transfers, proof of lineage, and notarized statements confirming my identity as the true heiress of the family fortune. For years, I had been treated as nothing. A maid, invisible, insignificant. And yet, all along, I had been entitled to wealth, respect, and the legacy this family had built. My pulse raced, a mix of disbelief, fury, and exhilaration. I thought of every insult hurled at me, every moment of humiliation endured, my aunt's cruel laughter, my cousin's sneeze, the endless chores that left my hands raw and my back aching. And suddenly, it was all illuminated in a new light. I wasn't powerless. I had been wronged, yes, but now I had the power to make things right. Or, perhaps, to make them pay. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine the look on their faces when they realized who I really was. The fear, the shock, the denial. My lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. Revenge did not have to be immediate. It could be precise, calculated, devastating, but first, I had to be careful. If I revealed the truth too soon, they would try to destroy me, to discredit me, to erase the very evidence I held in my hands. Patience would be my ally. Observation, my weapon. Strategy, my shield. I spent the next few days quietly confirming the documents, making sure everything was in order. I even consulted a lawyer discreetly, someone outside this mansion who could verify my claim. Every signature, every seal, every line of the will confirmed what I already knew in my heart. I was the rightful heir. Yet, as exhilarating as this revelation was, it came with a bitter taste. My family, the people who had laughed at me, scorned me, and dismissed me, would have to face me as an equal, perhaps even as someone greater. And I could not help but feel a dark thrill at the thought. I realized then that the woman I had always been, the obedient, invisible maid, was no more. She was gone, left behind with her humble tasks and quiet suffering. In her place stood someone who understood her worth, who had discovered the truth, and who would not rest until justice or revenge was served. I kept the documents hidden, carefully stored in my quarters, under lock and key. I continued my duties with the same outward humility, but inside, a storm was brewing. Every interaction, every chore, every forced smile was now a rehearsal for the day I would reveal the truth. And in that moment, I promised myself, "You took everything from me, but I am taking it all back. And when I do, they will understand the price of underestimating me. That night, as I lay awake listening to the distant ticking of the grandfather clock, I felt something awaken inside me, not just a desire for revenge, but a recognition of my own strength. I was no longer powerless. I was no longer invisible. I was the storm they never saw coming, and when the time came, they would know the full force of it. The discovery changed everything, but revelation alone would not undo years of cruelty. I knew that. Knowledge was power, yes, but action, that was where true power lay. And I would act methodically, deliberately, with patience sharper than any blade. I spent days moving through the mansion, watching, listening, taking notes. Every habit, every weakness, every arrogance of my relatives became a piece of my plan. I observed my aunt's obsession with appearances, her vanity that made her dismiss inconvenient truths. I noted my cousin's carelessness, their overconfidence that led them to underestimate the world and, more importantly, me, and I began to gather allies. There was Mrs. Hargrove, the housekeeper, who had whispered the first clue to me. She knew more than she let on, and I could see that loyalty in her eyes. I spoke to her quietly one evening, behind the servants' quarters. "You've always known something, haven't you?" I asked softly. She hesitated, then nodded. "I knew. I've waited for the right time. For the one who deserved it. That was all I needed. She would help me navigate the house, gather information, and avoid suspicion. Discretion would be our greatest weapon." Next, I reached beyond the mansion walls. I contacted a lawyer and a financial advisor discreetly, anonymously at first, who could verify my claims and eventually ensure my rightful inheritance. No loose ends. No mistakes. Every document, every signature, every legal form had to be beyond dispute. But the most exciting part, the part that gave me a thrill I could barely contain, was the strategy itself. I realized that revenge did not have to be loud to be effective. Subtlety was far more devastating. One misstep by them, one arrogance, one careless word, and the entire facade of their superiority could crumble. I began planning small tests, small moves. A missing ledger here, a subtle rumor there. I would observe their reactions, gauge their weaknesses, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. Meanwhile, I kept my outward demeanor unchanged. The maid with bowed head, quiet smile, and obedient hands. The woman they had always known, incapable of threat, entirely beneath notice, and yet, beneath the surface, a different woman was emerging. I was no longer just surviving, I was shaping my own destiny, laying the groundwork for the day when I would no longer serve but command. One evening, as I was dusting the portraits in the hallway, I allowed myself a private moment of reflection. I traced my fingers along the frame of my grandfather's portrait, the man who had believed in justice even when the world refused to see it. "I will honor you," I whispered, "and I will make them see the truth of who I am." The days that followed were a delicate dance. I listened at doors, noted whispered conversations, and discovered the petty secrets of my cousins, Isabella's penchant for gossip, Charles's careless financial mistakes, and my aunt's growing paranoia over imagined slights. All of it would be useful. All of it would be leveraged. I even began planting tiny seeds of doubt among the staff, suggesting that perhaps not everything in the household was as it seemed. A misplaced document here, a whispered comment there, harmless individually, but collectively. The threads of their certainty were beginning to fray. By the time the first week had passed, I realized something terrifyingly exhilarating. I had transformed. No longer was I simply a maid, quietly enduring humiliation. I was a strategist, a shadow in the halls, a force waiting to rise. And when I struck, I would strike with precision, with power, with an inevitability they could never anticipate. I smiled to myself as I locked the journal in a hidden compartment in my quarters. The future was mine to shape. The game had begun, and I intended to win. And for the first time, I allowed myself to whisper aloud, just to the walls that had witnessed so much of my suffering. Let them underestimate me. Let them think I am powerless. They will learn, too late, that every shadow has a story and every story has an ending. The time had come. Knowledge was no longer enough. Strategy without action was nothing more than daydreams scribbled in the margins of my life. And so I began. I started small, inconspicuous, harmless. If one didn't know what was really happening. It began with the ledgers. I accidentally misplaced a few pages of the household accounts. Nothing too obvious, just enough to cause mild confusion. My aunt, Lady Marguerite, immediately began questioning the staff, her tone clipped and harsh, her face contorting with irritation. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, unsure who to blame. All the while I observed, silent, a smile hidden behind my polite nods. Then there was Isabella. She had been planning a lavish party, eager to flaunt wealth that, technically, wasn't fully hers. I casually suggested, perhaps the guest list should be double-checked. Sometimes details are overlooked. She waved me off, laughing, but I had planted a seed. Later, a minor oversight caused a scheduling conflict, and the party nearly descended into chaos. Isabella panicked. I stayed in the background, silently pleased, knowing the first cracks were appearing. Charles, my cousin, proved almost too easy. His careless financial habits had always been his downfall. I accidentally left a critical document slightly misfiled in the study. A small oversight, but enough to delay a deal he had been so proud of. When he realized the mistake, he was furious, but there was no one to blame. He scowled at me once, suspicion flickering in his eyes, but I simply bowed and said, "I'm sorry. I'll be more careful." The image of the harmless maid masked the storm beneath. Each small victory bolstered my confidence. Each misstep I orchestrated revealed just how fragile their arrogance truly was. And I began to see a pattern. Their sense of superiority, their entitlement, and their cruelty had left them blind to reality. They were easy to manipulate, predictable in their arrogance, and utterly unprepared for someone who knew the truth and knew how to use it. But it wasn't just about creating chaos. I also needed information. Knowledge of their secrets, habits, and alliances would be crucial for the battles to come. I began to quietly gather intelligence, listening to conversations, observing behaviors, and noting any vulnerabilities. I discovered that my aunt had hidden debts she feared anyone would uncover. Isabella had secret romantic entanglement she wanted to keep hidden from the family. Charles was involved in risky ventures that could ruin him if exposed. Every piece of information was a tool, every secret, a weapon. And then came the first real test of my patience. My aunt called me into the drawing room one evening, her eyes sharp and suspicious. "You've been very attentive lately," she said, voice smooth but edged with accusation. "Almost too attentive. Tell me, have you been meddling where you should not?" I bowed politely, keeping my tone soft, my expression humble. "I only try to be helpful, Aunt Marguerite. I would never overstep." She studied me, her gaze piercing, searching for signs of deceit. But I had learned to hide my fire. The truth, the power was mine to wield when the time was right. And she left, dissatisfied and uneasy, a tiny crack in her armor. That night, I allowed myself a private moment of satisfaction. Each subtle move, each carefully executed plan, was proof that I was no longer powerless. The mansion, once a prison of humiliation and invisible suffering, had become a chessboard. Every family member, a piece I could manipulate. Every flaw, a step closer to reclaiming what was mine. I whispered to myself in the quiet of my room, "They think I am nothing. But I am already everything they will ever fear." And as I drifted to sleep, I realized something important. Revenge is not about rage alone. It is about patience, precision, and timing. And I finally was ready to strike with all three. The mansion, once a place of predictable cruelty and comfortable arrogance, began to feel uneasy. The air itself seemed to shift. My aunt's sharp eyes darted more frequently toward me, her lips pressed in lines of suspicion. My cousins, Isabella and Charles, whispered behind closed doors, casting nervous glances my way. Something had changed, and it thrilled me. But tension is a dangerous thing. It can break as easily as it bends. One wrong move, one miscalculated step, and the fragile balance I had begun to build could collapse. I had to be careful, but I also had to act. It started subtly. My aunt, ever vigilant, began monitoring my movements, questioning the staff, and scrutinizing my every action. One evening, she cornered me near the library. "You've been very busy lately, haven't you?" she asked, voice deceptively calm. "Do you have other interests besides your duties here?" I smiled faintly, keeping my expression neutral. "I only try to do my work well, Aunt Marguerite. I would never want to disappoint you." She studied me, eyes narrowing, but could find no fault. I knew she suspected, yet lacked proof. That was my advantage. Suspicion is a powerful weapon when wielded correctly. It unsettles, divides, and weakens. Meanwhile, my cousin's arrogance became my unwitting allies. Isabella, in her desperation to maintain social appearances, made mistakes I could exploit. Invitations sent to the wrong people. Financial miscalculations she tried to cover up. Every slip gave me information, every misstep, leverage. Charles, overconfident as ever, overextended himself in business ventures, unaware that I was quietly observing, cataloging, preparing, but not all was simple. A challenge appeared where I had not anticipated. A distant relative, long overlooked, seemed to sense the shift. He approached me one afternoon, ostensibly friendly, offering help in understanding the family's affairs. There was kindness in his smile, but his eyes. There was calculation there, too. I had to decide whether to trust him. Allies are essential, but some allies are wolves in disguise. I chose caution, listening more than speaking, revealing nothing of my discoveries or intentions. I could feel him watching, evaluating, weighing whether I was a threat or an opportunity. And then came the confrontation I had anticipated, though not so soon. Isabella, flustered and desperate, accused me openly one evening. You've been tampering with things. I know it. The ledgers, the schedules. It's you, isn't it?" The dining hall fell silent. Guests paused mid-conversation. My aunt's face tightened with fury. Charles's jaw clenched. And all I did was smile politely, head bowed slightly. "I only try to be helpful," I said softly. "If mistakes have been made, I assure you, I am not the cause." Her accusations fell flat, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The family began questioning themselves, wondering where the mistakes originated. My aunt grew increasingly paranoid, checking my quarters, scrutinizing the staff, obsessing over trivial details. It was beautiful to watch chaos born from arrogance, unraveling from within, And yet, amidst this growing tension, I knew I had to stay vigilant. Suspicion breeds danger, and I could not afford exposure too soon. I continued my dual life, the obedient, invisible maid by day, and the calculating strategist by night. Every movement, every word, every glance was deliberate, building toward a crescendo they could not anticipate. In the quiet of my room, I reflected on the progress so far. Small victories, yes, but the real battle was yet to come. The family's arrogance had made them blind to one truth. I was not just clever, I was determined. I was not just patient, I was relentless. And I was coming for everything they thought they owned. Let them doubt themselves, I whispered, voice low and steady. Let them squirm in the uncertainty I have created. Soon every secret, every flaw, every arrogance will be mine to command. And when the time comes, they will have no choice but to see the truth. The mansion felt charged, like a storm ready to break. And I finally was the lightning waiting to strike. The day arrived, though I had known it would. I could feel it in the air, in the subtle tremor of anticipation that ran through the mansion, in the nervous glances exchanged by my cousins. The house that had been my prison for so long now seemed like a stage, and I was about to step into the spotlight. I had prepared carefully. The documents, the proof of inheritance, every piece of evidence was secure, ready to be revealed at the precise moment. I had considered every possibility: resistance, denial, rage. Every reaction had a plan, a counter, a final blow that would leave no doubt. And so, when the family gathered in the drawing room that evening for what they thought was an ordinary dinner, I allowed them to believe I was just the obedient maid, quietly serving, silently enduring, but I had no intention of being invisible any longer. As the last of the guests murmured polite chatter, I stepped forward, holding the leather-bound journal and the sealed documents in my hands. Every eye turned to me, curiosity tinged with unease, a flicker of suspicion that had been growing for weeks. "Aunt Marguerite," I said softly, voice carrying just enough to command attention. "Isabella, Charles, I have something you need to see." Silence fell. My aunt's face tightened, her perfect composure faltering. My cousins exchanged worried glances. Sensing the gravity of the moment, I opened the journal, carefully, deliberately, and placed it on the table. Then I laid out the documents, the sealed letters, the notarized wills, the undeniable proof of lineage. "You have treated me as a servant, as someone beneath you," I continued, calm but unwavering. "You mocked me, humiliated me, and dismissed me for years. And yet, the truth has always been here." I gestured to the documents. "I am the rightful heir to this family fortune, the true daughter of this house, and the inheritor of all that you have hoarded and claimed as yours." The room erupted in disbelief. My aunt gasped, clutching her pearls as if to steady herself. Isabella's face turned pale, her eyes wide with shock. Charles's mouth opened and closed, no words forming. "This is impossible," my aunt hissed. You are lying." I shook my head, letting the documents speak for themselves. "The evidence is clear. Every signature, every seal, every line confirms the truth. I am who I have always been. You have been blind to it." The guests' friends, business associates, even a few distant relatives watched in stunned silence. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. The facade of power and wealth my family had maintained for generations was crumbling before their eyes. "You underestimated me," I said, voice steady, almost serene. "You thought obedience meant weakness. You thought invisibility meant insignificance. But I have been here all along, waiting, observing, and now I am claiming what is mine. My aunt's eyes narrowed, fury and disbelief warring on her face. You cannot take this from me. I smiled faintly. Watch me. I handed the documents to the family lawyer I had quietly summoned beforehand. Every signature, every clause, every line was verified in their presence. The lawyer nodded solemnly. The documents are legally binding. There is no dispute. Shock turned to murmurs of panic. Isabella began trembling. Charles's face twisted in anger, and even my aunt struggled to maintain her composure. The mansion had always been theirs, or so they thought. Now it belonged to me, and in that moment, I felt a quiet, fierce satisfaction not from cruelty, but from justice. Every insult, every act of disdain, every humiliation I had endured was avenged, not by rage, but by truth. You treated me as less than human, I said softly, but with steel beneath the words. Now, you will see the power of what you ignored. The room was silent again. But this time it was a silence of recognition, fear, shock, and, perhaps, a hint of awe. For the first time in my life, I stood not as a maid, not as a shadow, but as the rightful heir. And the mansion, once a place of suffering, had become a testament to my strength, my patience, and my resilience. This is only the beginning, I whispered to myself. The storm in my heart finally finding its voice. The world will know who I am, and they will never forget. The air in the mansion had changed. Where once there had been arrogance, cruelty, and whispered contempt, now there was tension, uncertainty, and fear. I moved through the rooms with a quiet authority that had been denied to me for years. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered word was now mine to command. The first step was the estate itself. I summoned the staff and instructed them clearly. The house would be managed according to my directives. No more favoritism, no more blind obedience to my aunt or cousins. They hesitated, unsure, but Mrs. Hargrove gave me a subtle nod of reassurance. Loyalty, I realized, could be earned even in places where it had been absent before. Next came the financial empire my family had built. I called in the business associates, partners, and advisors who had long answered to my aunt's whims. I presented the verified documents, asserting my authority with calm precision. Contracts, ledgers, investments all legally under my name. The partners looked at me first with disbelief, then with respect, as the truth of my claim sank in. From this day forward, I declared, all matters of this estate and business are under my direction. Every decision, every contract, every investment will be guided by me. The room was silent, save for the rustle of papers and the occasional stunned gasp. My aunt's face was pale, her perfectly maintained composure cracking. Isabella trembled, trying to mask her fear with forced indignation, while Charles's anger simmered just beneath the surface, but I did not stop at legal power. I had gathered the intelligence, observed the weaknesses, and now I would use them. Isabella's secret engagements, Charles's risky ventures, my aunt's hidden debts all were revealed carefully, publicly, in the presence of trusted advisors and family friends. The shock was absolute. Their arrogance, built over decades, crumbled in a matter of hours. You believed wealth and power could make you untouchable, I said softly, letting my voice carry over the murmurs. But power is meaningless without honor, integrity, and foresight. You have been reckless, blind, and cruel. And now the consequences are yours to bear. I watched as they realized that the world had finally caught up with them. Their false sense of security shattered. Their respect, carefully cultivated and assumed as their birthright, evaporated, and yet I did not destroy them. That would have been petty. Instead, I offered them a chance to acknowledge their mistakes, to accept the truth, and to adjust to the new reality. Some resisted, clinging desperately to denial, but most recognized the inevitability of their situation. For me, it was not just revenge, it was reclamation. Reclamation of my identity, my worth, and my future. Every humiliation I had endured, every insult, every act of cruelty, had led me here. And now, I was no longer invisible. I was not a maid. I was the rightful mistress of the mansion, the heiress of the family fortune, and the architect of my destiny, the family. Once so confident in their superiority, now moved in cautious silence, aware that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. I could see the fear in their eyes, but also the faintest glimmer of respect. Begrudging though it was, that night, as I walked through the grand halls of the mansion, I paused before the portraits of my ancestors. My fingers traced the frames gently. "I have fulfilled what was denied to me," I whispered, voice soft but unwavering. "And I will continue to build, to lead, and to honor the legacy I was born to inherit." For the first time, I felt complete. The storm had passed, leaving clarity and control in its wake. The mansion was no longer a prison, it was my domain. And as I looked out over the estate, the moonlight casting silver shadows over the gardens, I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. The game was far from over, but the first and most important move had been won. "Let them remember this night," I murmured, as the night the maid became the mistress. The night everything changed. The aftermath of the reveal was unlike anything the mansion had ever witnessed. Where there had been certainty, control, and arrogance, now there was doubt, shame, and reckoning. My aunt, Lady Marguerite, who had prided herself on her command and influence, was forced to confront her failures. Her carefully curated image, built over decades, crumbled as advisors, partners, and friends acknowledged my rightful claim. The hidden debts she had meticulously concealed were now accounted for, and she had no defense. Her fury was palpable, but powerless to change what was inevitable. Isabella, once so gleeful in her superiority, faced exposure for her secret engagements and reckless decisions. The friends and social circles she had counted on for validation now looked at her with skepticism, doubt replacing admiration. Her pride was shattered, and she had only herself to blame. Charles, the reckless cousin, struggled with the ruin his ventures could have caused. Only through my guidance and careful restructuring was he allowed to recover, but he understood, painfully, that his mistakes had consequences. He no longer moved through the world with the arrogance of invincibility, and yet, I chose mercy where it was possible. The past could not be erased, but it could inform the future. I allowed my family a chance to rebuild their lives under the new order, guided, watched, and restrained by the knowledge that I now held power. I could have crushed them entirely, but that would have been vindictive. My victory was in reclamation, not destruction. I also extended a quiet hand of reconciliation to those willing to acknowledge the truth and accept their new roles. Some embraced it, humbled and cautious. Others resisted, but the mansion was no longer theirs to manipulate or control. Outside the walls of the estate, word of the shift in power began to spread. Business associates, social acquaintances, and even distant relatives recognized the rise of the true heiress. The reputation my family had clung to was rewritten not by gossip, not by rumor, but by undeniable fact and authority. And as the days passed, I found a sense of peace settling over me. The storm of deceit, cruelty, and arrogance that had dominated my life for so long had passed. The mansion, the fortune, the legacy all now belonged to the one who had been wronged and had endured. Yet I knew that true justice is not only about reclaiming what is yours. It is also about understanding the lessons life has handed you. The arrogance, ignorance, and cruelty of my relatives had been their downfall, but it was my patience, intelligence, and moral clarity that allowed me to rise. I had been tested, and I had passed. I walked through the gardens one evening, the moonlight shimmering on the fountains and marble statues. Every corner of the estate now reflected not just wealth, but order, respect, and the triumph of truth. I breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the past lift, replaced by the promise of a future I had earned. Justice is not revenge, I whispered softly, almost to myself. It is recognition. It is balance. And today, balance has been restored. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel whole. Not merely powerful, not merely vindicated, but complete. I had endured. I had discovered the truth, and I had reclaimed my life. And as the mansion settled into an uneasy quiet, I knew that while challenges may arise in the future, the foundation had been laid. The rightful heir had emerged not from greed, not from anger, but from patience, strategy, and the unwavering knowledge of her own worth. They will remember, I murmured, voice low but certain. They will remember who I am, and they will never underestimate me again. The mansion was quiet, but not in the way it had once been. It was a quiet born of respect, of order, and of acknowledgement. The chaos, cruelty, and arrogance that had defined my life here for so long had been replaced by something entirely new. I walked through the grand halls, my footsteps echoing softly against the polished floors. The portraits of my ancestors seemed to watch me not with judgment, but with recognition. I had fulfilled the promise that had been hidden from me, reclaimed what had been denied, and in doing so, had rewritten my own story. No longer the maid, no longer invisible, no longer powerless, I was the rightful heir. And with that realization came not just satisfaction, but clarity. Power is not in wealth alone, nor in status, nor in the fear of others. True power lies in knowledge, patience, and the unwavering understanding of your own worth. The family, once so confident and careless, had learned a lesson they would not forget. My aunt, humbled and cautious, now acted with the decorum her station demanded. Isabella and Charles, tempered by the consequences of their arrogance, moved through the world with a new awareness. And I moved forward with quiet authority, knowing that justice had been served, and mercy had been extended where it was deserved. But beyond the mansion, beyond the estate, I saw the life I could create. I began making decisions not just for myself, but for the legacy I would leave behind. Investments, philanthropy, and leadership, all guided by the lessons of patience, resilience, and moral clarity I had learned. I understood that power without purpose is hollow, and that the true inheritance is the ability to shape the world with intention. And yet, in the quiet moments, when the moon cast silver shadows across the gardens, I would remember the journey that brought me here. Every insult, every act of cruelty, every moment of humiliation had forged the person I had become. I had endured, observed, and planned. I had been invisible, but never powerless. This is only the beginning, I whispered softly to myself, a smile touching my lips. The beginning of a life built on truth, on justice, and on the knowledge that no one can ever take what is rightfully yours if you are willing to claim it. The mansion, once a symbol of oppression and disdain, now reflected my authority and my vision. The halls whispered not of fear, but of respect. The estate shimmered not with the arrogance of those who claimed it, but with the clarity and purpose of the one who had earned it. And as I stood before the grand windows, watching the sunrise spill gold across the gardens, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. I had been denied, overlooked, and mistreated, but I had also been tested, and I had risen. I was no longer defined by the cruelty of others, but by the strength, patience, and wisdom I had cultivated in the shadows. "The world will remember me," I murmured, voice steady, full of quiet triumph. Not as the maid they dismissed, but as the woman who claimed her destiny, who turned injustice into strength, and who became the storm they never saw coming, the mansion, the fortune, the legacy. They were mine. And more importantly, I was finally, wholly, undeniably free. Thanks for watching.